So we've been asked to talk a little bit about the future of fashion in London, and I thought before we start looking ahead, Dylan, I thought it might be worthwhile looking back a bit, because over the past 10 years or so, the fashion industry in London has undergone a rapid transformation, actually, which predates my working in the fashion industry. So, Dylan, first of all, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what the industry here in London was like 10 years ago.
Pretty moribund, actually. I think that London has obviously always been at the very centre of what's happening in the fashion world. You look back to the 50s, the 60s, every decade up until now. But what it's never had is, for the last, say, 40, 45 years, what it hasn't had is the sort of global business scale that it's got at the moment. And actually, if you look at London Fashion Week now, it's probably the coolest London Fashion Week. It's probably the coolest fashion week in the entire world. And that certainly wasn't the case 10 or 15 years ago. And it's, the current administration has done an extraordinary job in focusing attention on the capital.
So just to provide a little bit more detail, I mean, even when I started working in the fashion business about 6 years ago, the London Fashion Week schedule was running like 2 hours late. No real major editors from international magazines were really showing up in London. Certainly not Anna Wintour.
No, I think that you had. It's possible to say that London has forever been a cultural centre, but yeah, in terms of people visiting from the industry, London was an also-ran. In fact, it wasn't on many people's schedules. And the fact that we have the likes of Paul Smith and Burberry, iconic British brands, now showing in London where they weren't 10 years ago, is an incredible 180-degree turnaround.
Right, and I think you've picked up on probably the point at which a massive shift started to happen. So the London Fashion Week schedule was quite barren, and a lot of the brands, including the Queen and Stella McCartney and others, had shifted off to Paris or New York or elsewhere. And then there was a return. There was a new energy of creativity that started. So we had lots of young designers coming out of Central St. Martin's and the Royal College and elsewhere, and they started populating the schedule of London Fashion Week and bringing more energy to it. And then Burberry brought its show back from Milan. And how important was it, that decision by Burberry, to show here in the overall shift that we've seen? In our world, incredibly important. Yeah.
I mean, you look at the creativity that's come out of our art schools in the last 30, 40 years, and those designers would always be snapped up really quickly by the big conglomerates, and they would be working in Paris or New York or Milan in 5 minutes. And to actually keep those designers in London and to actually bring iconic designers back to show in London from those cities was probably the most important thing that's happened to the fashion industry in this country in the last 50 years.
Okay. So that's what I would call maybe step one. Step two was, earlier this year, for the first time, the British Fashion Council, under your lead also, carved out a special few days of Fashion Week for men. And this was the first time that menswear had been given that kind of specific space in which to participate in kind of the global menswear calendar. Can you talk a little bit about the rationale behind that decision to take menswear out of that kind of one day at the end of London Fashion Week into its own week, and then talk a little bit about the strategy for relaunching it?
Well, the men's shows in London up until this year were sort of like the women's shows were in London 10 years ago. Lots of very enthusiastic people, lots of very good designers, but the structure of the week was very poor, and the way that message was articulated was very poor too. So we decided to take that one day and move it into the proper part of the schedule. So London now comes before Florence, Milan, Paris and New York. It kicks off the menswear schedule. And we did it for a variety of reasons. A, that we had to draw more attention to the fact that we had all this fantastic talent The fact that it felt like the right time, because unlike 10, 20 years ago, these were designers that had proper businesses. Plus, these designers deserved it. There were too many people who wanted to show in that one day at the end of London Fashion Week. So we decided to give them a platform. To be honest with you, it started as a legacy project because of the Olympics, the Jubilee year, and we wanted to focus attention on menswear. But we were only doing it for about 5 minutes before we realized that this was a real going concern. And also, London's more interesting than any other fashion capital in the world. If you show in New York, you're showing in the most neurotic city in the world. If you show in Milan, you're showing in the most boring Northern European city that isn't in Germany. And if you're showing in Paris, you're showing in the most bourgeois city in Europe. So actually, London's got everything. It's got parks, it's got fantastic restaurants, the best exhibitions, the best galleries, villages. We've got that sort of multicultural village culture that New York had in the 80s. And so why wouldn't you want to show in London?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should not underestimate the importance of all of these other factors, because that's what also attracts creative talent. That's what makes London a city that nourishes and inspires people. I mean, designers from all over the world come here to get inspiration from our streets, from the people that bring the energy to London. So I think that's a really important point.
Well, they come here to soak up the culture.
Yeah.
And actually, it was very important for us to build a sort of cultural agenda around Fashion Week. I mean, we had 60 shows over 4 days. And as well as having all the big British brands, we had lots of international brands like Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, Tom Ford, etc. But it was important for us to make sure that all these visiting journalists and fashion buyers had some other things to do. So there were concerts, there were exhibitions, there were dinners, cocktail parties, etc., to try and give a flavour of that fantastic mix that you have in London.
But there's one thing that you haven't mentioned, which I think is maybe worth sharing with everyone, which was that it was the Prince of Wales who actually launched the whole of the London Collections Men initiative at St. James's Palace. So how important was that, having his support, and what impact do you think it had on the visibility?
It was incredibly important for the international visitors. We approached his office some time ago because he has a very close association with the Wool Board, and as soon as we knew that we had his backing, there was a sort of quantum shift, because particularly to Americans, you know, having the chance to meet a member of the royal family, quite a senior member of the royal family, someone who's going to be king, in St. James's Palace is quite a big deal. And actually, I think everyone, it was a very inclusive atmosphere. Yeah. So in terms of doing something which drew attention to London, I think that was very, very helpful. Because also, we wanted to basically show that we had an incredibly varied offer, because you've got Savile Row here, you've got funny trousers in Shoreditch, and sort of everything in between.
Yeah. It was actually quite amazing to be in St. James's Palace and see, you know, the normally quite cool and, you know, chilled out fashion people kind of running around the room trying to get into one of these circles where Prince Charles was. I mean, it was quite a scene. Perhaps we can fast forward a bit, Dylan. So if that was step one, so we talked about step one, which was putting London back on the fashion map, as it were. Step two is kind of carving out this space for menswear. You know, it still seems to me that apart from Burberry and, say, Paul Smith and Mulberry and a couple of others, we've still not yet provided in London the ability for businesses to really scale. And the real challenge that I see facing our designers, particularly the individual entrepreneurial designers who set up their own homegrown businesses is a local manufacturing base. And I know that this is high on the priority list for both the government and the British Fashion Council. Perhaps you can share some thoughts on how we might address this challenge.
Well, I don't think you'd find anyone to disagree with you, and anyone who thinks that manufacturing in this country is in anything other than a rather parlous state at the moment. However, our job is to draw attention to the great breadth of talent that we have here, and hopefully try and harness that with manufacturers. I mean, the big issue that we had, my big fear was that doing it second time around, and London Collections Men will happen in London again in January. My big fear was it would be like doing something for the Prince's Trust, where you go around again and people go, I've done that, I've given. But actually, if we've received more calls than we've made, and we've managed to attract Alexander McQueen back to show in London, and Tom Ford has moved his operation from Milan to London, and the Men's Week in January will be launched by David Cameron at Downing Street, which again is a fantastic sort of vote of confidence, if you like. But yeah, manufacturing is incredibly important, but we know that there are hurdles ahead, but the most important thing is draw attention to London.
Okay. I think that we might have some time now to take some questions from the audience. Should anyone be interested in asking either Dylan or me any questions about fashion in London?
There's one over here.
One in the back corner, yeah.
You've gone through stages 1 and 2, put London back on the map. What are stages 3 and 4 for the next 10 years?
Our aspirations are to make the Men's Week in London not just one of the most important men's weeks, but the most important. Many international designers show in Milan and Paris because they are fantastic industries. They've been doing it forever. They're incredible machines. And there's absolutely no reason why they actually shouldn't show there, in all seriousness. But our aspirations are to make London not just as good as those, but better.
There's one thing I would add, which is apart from kind of the evolution that Dylan's talking about, I think one thing that the capital really needs now is that we have businesses that have scaled to, say, 3 or 5 million pounds in revenue. I think what's missing now, and I'm often approached by investors who are seeking opportunities to invest in the fashion sector, and whereas investing in brands at the very, very early stages is very risky, once businesses have scaled to the level we're talking about, there is now, I think, a gap in the market for experienced investors, strategic investors, venture capital investors who are interested in supporting early stage fashion businesses. I mean, that's something that the industry here is in sore need of. The British Fashion Council has been great at working with corporate sponsors and others to give out quite sizable awards to some of the top businesses. But now those designers who've kind of won every award they can win, they've won every accolade, they've got all the kind of free financing they can get. Many of those young designers are now looking for capital as well. So I think investment also has to play a part in it.
We heard this morning about the rise of the making economy, things like 3D printing and use techniques, and we're aware of developments like spray-on fabrics and people growing materials and things. If you look 10 years ahead, how do you think all those kinds of developments, those kind of innovations, might reshape the fashion map of London? What impact could it have on the fashion industry here?
Personally, I think that if those developments that you're talking about are actually going to have a serious effect on the industry, they won't just affect London. I mean, they will affect the industry globally. The important thing is to make sure that we steal a march on everyone else, and if we are developing those, to actually try and make sure that we support the homegrown designers who are actually using them.
I think if I was going to add something, it would be that these in particular things like 3D printing and new textile developments that you see. I mean, the first time a designer brought to me something that was done on 3D printing, he had instead of drawing sketches for me to look at, he had created kind of 3D form that had been printed out at, I think it was at the London College of Fashion. And so I know that young designers, I mean, especially the designers in London with the mixing of creativity and technology, they're very open to trying new things. So I think London can be seen as a hotbed of experimentation for these new technologies. I think also with regards to some of these issues we were talking about before about manufacturing, to the extent that this idea of very low volume manufacturing that could be done elsewhere without the level of complexity we have today, it might make some of the smaller stage businesses here that I was mentioning more viable because they can access manufacturing at low volume, but at value that still they can sell. Without creating products that are far too expensive. So it remains to be seen, but I think London's particularly well positioned because of this openness to change, to try some of these new things out. Yeah.
There's a man with his hand up here.
Oh, there's someone right there. Okay.
Well, you've got a microphone.
Over the years, how have you guys seen the London Fashion Week evaluation parameters changing? I mean, if we were to put down, say, the evaluation parameters for the London Fashion Week, what would be the main parameters? And how has it changed over the years?
I couldn't hear that question.
I think you were asking about the evaluation parameters and how they've changed.
Yeah, means what's successful.
I mean, I don't know that there's anything in particular that's written down, and I'm not privy to the British Fashion Council meetings. I think that initially, early on, when I first started working in fashion here in London, it was all about buzz. And there wasn't, and it was a lot of emphasis on PR and marketing, which, you know, as Dylan says, is a very important part of the role of London Fashion Week, which is to shed a light on the designers and talents that we have here. I have noticed that, you know, there are a lot more, especially the young designers here, they've realized that buzz is not enough. We've already had so many situations in London with designers who have global profiles and have no business to speak of. Right? And I think many of the next generation of fashion designers have seen what's happened to these designers in the past, and that they've realized that buzz and PR isn't enough. They really do need to figure out how to build a business. So if I was going to say the one parameter that's changed is an increasing focus on, and you know, frankly, you know, before it was maybe an embarrassment or something that was frowned upon if you were looking to be commercial in London or looking to build a business in fashion in London. I think that attitude of it being less of a priority has changed, and I think people recognize now that it's an important part of having a long career.
I think it's a paradigm shift that the important thing and the way you quantify the success of what's happening in London is whether or not you can attract international designers to show here. And as I said, Tom Ford is now moving from Milan to London to show. I mean, Tom Ford could show in Stockholm. He could show in County Tipperary. And if he shows there, the international community will follow him. And that's the important thing about London, is attracting the international designers of that clout.
Ivan, I heard something about you saying boring about German cities early on, and I think apparently I'm the only...
You're being blamed for that.
It wasn't me, it was him.
It was him, actually. I threw my voice, it was him, yeah.
And the thing is, I'm probably the only German that flew here for this event. I'm from Hamburg, and...
We love Hamburg. Hamburg is a great city.
I've heard it's the next Berlin, actually.
This is not about the old times. It's about the future, right? And I'm just curious, I mean, given that maybe there's some truth about German cities being boring, and when can we expect some sort of, that you guys from England teach us how to make a bit more better fashion weeks, better cities, better cultural things, apart from, you know, just saying, okay, we got this island, we're really good. Because we have the EU, and I think in this morning, and I'm serious about this, this morning there was a lot of talk about this great technology from England, about the airports that will be exported in the future. Do you see this kind of exports also happening in more sort of cultural, creative industries? And we should do that for Germany too.
Seriously, Berlin has the sort of fashion kudos that London would actually kill for. I mean, you have one of the biggest trade fairs in the industry, and actually your infrastructure is incredibly sophisticated. So in that respect, that's where we want to be. The second part of the question, you can answer.
I would say, pardon? Well, listen, I agree with Dylan. I mean, I think Berlin is maybe one of the most exciting cities on the planet, and you know, I think each city has to figure out its own native strengths and build on those. And you know, Berlin has, you know, cheap rent and lots of young people and creativity working for it. With regards to kind of exporting British creativity, I would say that's already happening in a very large degree. If you look at the fashion houses in New York, in Paris, and Milan, very often, and I'd say more than 50% of the time, the creative director of those houses has come out of Central St. Martin's, the Royal College of Art, or the London College of Fashion. And I think that's, you know, British creativity being spread around the fashion industry around the world. And I think on that note, we have to end. So thank you very much.